Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and you're on the channel called Discerning What is True here on YouTube and on Odyssey, and I'm also live on Facebook. I'm going to continue my reading from the book called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, but I'm going to go, when I've concluded the book here with Anthony C. Sutton, will be the appendix, which he's going to talk about a couple things here. So I'm going to share this with you. As he shares what he thinks is taking place. The Appendix 2, the Jewish conspiracy theory of the Bolshevik Revolution. There is a extensive literature in English, French, and German reflecting the argument that the Bolshevik Revolution was the result of a Jewish conspiracy, more specifically, a conspiracy by Jewish world bankers. Generally, world control is seen as the ultimate objective. The Bolshevik Revolution was but one phase of a wider program that supposedly reflects an age-old religious struggle between Christianity and the forces of darkness. The argument and its variants can be found in the most surprising places and from quite surprising persons, that is. In February of 1920, Winston Churchill wrote an article rarely cited today, the London Illustrated Sunday Era, entitled Zionism versus Bolshevikism. In this article, Churchill concludes that it was particularly important that the national Jews in every country who are loyal to the land of their adoption should come forward on every occasion and take a prominent part in every measure for combating the Bolshevik conspiracy. Churchill draws a line between national Jews and what he calls international Jews. He argues that the international and for the most aesthetic Jews certainly have a very great role in the creation of Bolshevikism and bringing about the Russian Revolution. He asserts that it's contrary to fact that with the exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures in the revolution were Jewish, and adds also contrary to fact that in many cases, Jewish interests and Jewish places of worship were accepted by the Bolsheviks from their policies of seizure. And by the way, Lenin was a Jew. We discovered that. Naturally, Churchill would not have known that. In 1991 or 92, when the collapse of the Soviet Union took place, people went in and looked at the archives and discovered that Lenin was a Jew. See where we're at here. So Churchill calls the international Jews a sinister configuration emerged from the persecuted populations of countries where Jews have been persecuted on account of their race. Winston Churchill traces the movement back to Spartacus Weishaupt, throws his literacy knot around Trotsky, I should say literacy net around Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, and charges this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization, for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development of envious malevolence and impossible equality has been steadily growing. Churchill then argues that this conspiratorial Spartacus Weishaupt group has been the mainspring of every subversive movement in the 19th century, while pointing out that Zionism and Bolshevikism are competing for the soul of the Jewish people. Churchill in 1920 was preoccupied with the role of the Jew in the Bolshevik Revolution and the existence of a worldwide Jewish conspiracy. Another well-known author in the 1920s named Henry Wickham Steele, S-T-E-E-D, describes in the second volume of his Through 30 Years, 1892 to 1922, page 302, how he attempted to bring the Jewish conspiracy concept to the attention of Colonel Edward M. House and President Woodrow Wilson. One day in March 1919, Wickham Steele called Colonel House and found him disturbed over Steele's recent criticism of U.S. recognition of the Bolsheviks. Steele pointed out to House that Wilson would be discredited among the many peoples and nations of Europe and insisted that unknown to him Prime movers were Jacob Schiff, Warburg, and other international financiers who wished above all to bolster up the Jewish Bolsheviks in order to secure a field for German and Jewish exploitation of Russia. According to Steele, Colonel House argued for the establishment of economic relations with the Soviet Union. Probably the most superficial damning collection of documents on the Jewish conspiracy is in the State Department, that is, the decimal files. The central document is one entitled Bolshevism and Judaism, dated November 13, 1918. The text is in the form of a report which states that the revolution in Russia was engineered in February of 1916, and it was found that the following persons and firms were engaged in this destructive work. So what they're going to do is simply, this is a State Department paper here. So we'll look at the leaders here. Jacob Schiff is a Jew. Kuhn, Lowe and Company is a Jewish firm. Management of that particular bank is Jacob Schiff, Felix Warburg, Otto H. Kahn, Mortimer L. Schiff, and Jerome J. Hanuler, all Jews. Another person involved was Guggenheimer, who was a Jew. Another one, number 4, is Max Breitung, B-R-E-I-T-U-N-G. Breitung is a Jew. Isaac Seligman is a Jew. The report goes on to assert that there can be no doubt that the Russian Revolution was started and engineered by this group, and that in April 1917, Jacob Schiff, in fact, made a public announcement. It was due to his financial influence that the Russian Revolution was successfully accomplished, and in the spring of 1917, Jacob Schiff started to finance Trotsky, a Jew, for the purpose of accomplishing a social revolution in Russia. Not a revolution, folks, but a social revolution. The report contains other miscellaneous information about Max Warburg, financing of Trotsky, the role of the Rhenish Westphalian Syndicate, and Olaf Aschberg of the now Banken, that is in Stockholm, together with Jodorowsky, the anonymous author actually employed by the U.S. War Trade Board, states that the links between these organizations and their finances of the Bolshevik Revolution show how the link between Jewish multi-millionaires and Jewish proletarians was forged. The report goes on to list a large number of Bolsheviks who were also Jews, and then describe the actions of Paul Warburg, Julius Magnuson, M-A-G-N-E-S, Kuhn, Lowe and Company, and Speyer, S-P-E-Y-E-R, and Company. The report ends with a barb at international Jewry and replaces the argument into the content of a Christian-Jewish conflict backed up by quotations from the Protocols of Zion. Accompanying this report is a series of cables between the State Department in Washington and the American Embassy in London concerning the steps to be taken with these documents. October 16, 1919, in a confidential file secret for Winslow from Wright, financial aid to Bolshevism and Bolshevik Revolution in Russia from prominent American Jews such as Jacob Schiff, Felix Warburg, Otto Kahn, Mendel Schiff, Jerome Hanuler, Max Breitung, and one of the Guggenheimers. Documents in possession of British police authorities from French sources ask for any facts regarding this. Then in October 17th, Great Britain, it says that this again is a telegram, very secret, right from Winslow, financial aid to Bolshevik Revolution in Russia from prominent American Jews. No proof, but investigating. Asked to urge Britain authorities to suspend publication at least until receipt of documents by department. November 28, again by a telegram. This is for Wright. Document refinancing aid to Bolsheviks by prominent American Jews. Reports identify as French translation of a statement originally prepared in English by Russian citizens in America, etc. Seems most unwise to give / the distinction of philosophy. It was agreed to suppress this material, and the files conclude, I think we have the whole thing in cold storage. Another document marked most secret is included with the batch of materials. The provenance of the documents is unknown. It is perhaps FBI or military intelligence. It reviews a translation of the protocols of the meetings of the wise men of Zion and concludes. In this connection, a letter was sent to Mr. W, enclosing a memorandum from us with regard to certain information from the American military attaché to the effect that the British authorities had letters intercepted from various groups of international Jews setting out a scheme for world dominion. Copies of this material will be very useful to us. The information was apparently developed, and a letter of British intelligence report makes the flat accusation. Summary: there is now definite evidence that Bolshevikism is an international movement controlled by Jews. Communications are passing between the leaders in America, France, Russia, and England with a view to concerted action. However, none of the above statements can be supported with hard empirical evidence. The most significant information is contained in the paragraph to the effect that the British authorities possess letters intercepted from various groups of international Jews setting out a scheme for world dominion. If indeed such letters exist, then they would provide support or non-support for a present unsubstantiated hypothesis, to wit, that is, the Bolshevik Revolution and other revolutions are the work of a worldwide Jewish conspiracy. However, or I should say, moreover, when statements and assertions are not supported by hard evidence and where attempts to unearth hard evidence lead in a circle back to the starting point, particularly when everyone is quoting everyone else, then we must reject the story as spurious. There is no concrete evidence that the Jews were involved in the Bolshevik Revolution because they were Jewish. There may indeed have been a higher proportion of Jews involved, but given Tsarist treatments of Jews, what else would we expect? There were probably many Englishmen or persons of English origin in the American Revolution fighting the Redcoats. So what? Does that make the American Revolution an English conspiracy? Winston Churchill's statement that Jews had a very great role in the Bolshevik Revolution is supported only by distorted evidence. The list of Jews involved in the Bolshevik Revolution must be weighed against lists of non-Jews involved in the revolution also. When this scientific procedure is adopted, the proportion of foreign Jewish Bolsheviks involved falls to less than 20% of the total number of revolutionaries. And these Jews were mostly deported, murdered, or sent to Siberia in the following years. Modern Russia has in fact maintained a Tsarist anti-Semitism. It is significant that documents in the State Department files confirm that the investment banker Jacob Schiff, often cited as a source of funds for the Bolshevik Revolution, was in fact against support of the Bolshevik regime. This position, as we shall see, was in direct contrast to the Morgan Rockefeller promotion of the Bolsheviks. The persistence with which the Jewish conspiracy myth has been pushed suggests that it may well be a deliberate device to divert attention from the real issues and the real causes. The evidence provided in this book suggests that the New York bankers who were also Jewish had relatively minor roles in supporting the Bolsheviks, while the New York bankers who were also Gentiles, such as Morgan, Rockefeller, and Thompson, had major roles. What better way to divert attention from the real operatives than by the medieval boogeyman of anti-Semitism? It's interesting what they're talking about. I don't know if I would agree with him at all, but there is a way. He is talking about certain groups of people actually who were involved. Morgan, Rockefeller, but these might be crypto Jews. You see, you've got to think about that also. I don't know if they don't answer that question. They don't ask that question, I should say. Selected documents. This is in Appendix 3. Selected documents from government files of the United States and Great Britain. Document number 1, cable from Ambassador Francis in Petrograph, U.S. State Department, and related letters from Secretary of State Robin Lansing to President Woodrow Wilson, March 17, 1917. Document 2, British Foreign Office document that is in October of 1917, claiming Kerensky was in the pay of the German government and aiding the Bolsheviks. I'll say this is what I think. I believe that Kerensky was an in-between guy. After the Tsar, he took over. He's the middleman, so to speak, and he's going to state. I did not know this. He was paid by the German government, but he was also aiding the Bolsheviks, and we know that because simply is at some of the last things he does, he opens up the prisons and the mental institutions and lets these people go, which was a scourge upon what was going on, which made it even worse for people. These people were not afraid of anything. They would just simply do things out in sunlight, daylight. We're not afraid. Document number 3, Jacobship of Kumlo and Company and his position on the Kerensky and Bolshevik regimes. Document number 4, memorandum from Boyce Thompson, director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, to the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, December 1917. Document number 5, letter from Felix Frankfurter to the Soviet agent Santerio Neuroterveyo in May 9, 1918. Document number 6, personnel of the Soviet Bureau that is in New York, 1920, list from the New York State LUSK, L-U-S-K, committee files. Document number 7, letters from National City Bank to the U.S. Treasury referring to Lockwood Martins and Dr. Julius Hammer, April 15, 1919. Document number 8, letter from Soviet agent William Bill Bofroff, B-O-B-R-O-F-F, to Kenneth Duran, that is in August 3, 1920. Document number 9, a memo referring to a member of the J.P. Morgan firm and the British Director of Propaganda, Lord Northcliffe. Now, Lord Northcliffe is involved here, is also, when I'm not here, he's also involved with the Tavistock Group. I do know that because we read the book, The Tavistock Group, the Tavistock Institution book by Dr. John Coleman, and that name is prominent in the book. Document number 10, State Department memo, May 29, 1922, regarding General Electric Company. And then we go into another document here as we go through here is the last part of the book. Document number 1, cable from Ambassador Francis Petrograph to the Department of State, Washington, D.C., dated March 4, 1917, reported the first stages of the Russian Revolution. This is dated March 14, 1917. Secretary of State, Washington. And these are all telegrams, so here's what they're saying. Unable to send a cablegram since the 11th, revolutionists have absolute control of Petrograph and are making strenuous efforts to preserve order, which successfully except in rare instances. No cablegrams since your 1251 of the 9th. Received March 11th. Provisional government organized under the authority of the Duma, which is the government there, which refused to obey the emperor's orders of adjournment. Rod Zaunot, president of the Duma, issuing orders over his own signature. Minister reported to have resigned. Ministries found are taking before the Duma. Also, many Russian officers and other high officers. Much, if not all, regiment ordered to Petrograd have joined the revolutionaries after arrival. American colonies safe. No knowledge of any injuries to American citizens. Francis was American ambassador. Naturally, on receipt of the preceding cable, Robert Lansing, Secretary of State, made its contents available to President Wilson. Personal and confidential. My dear Mr. President, I enclose to you a very important cablegram which has just come from Petrograd and also a clipping from the New York World this morning, in which a statement is made by Senor Simonia, Minister without portfolio, is the Italian cabinet, which is significant in view of Mr. Francis' report. My own impression is that the Allies know of this matter and I presume are favorable to the revolutionists, since the court party has been, throughout the war, secretly pro-German. Faithfully yours, Robert Lansing, enclosed the President to the White House. Comment. The significant phase of the Lansing-Wilson letter is my own impression is that The Allies know of this matter and I presume are favorable to the revolutionists, since the court party has been, throughout the war, secretly pro-German. It will be recalled in Chapter 2 that Ambassador Dodd, D-O-D-D, claimed that the Charles R. Crane of Westinghouse and of Crane Company in New York and an advisor to President Wilson was involved in this first revolution. Document number 2, memorandum from Great Britain Foreign Office, the war that is in Russia, October 23rd, 1917. Document says personal and secret. Disquieting rumors have reached us from more than one source that Kerensky is in Germans' pay and that he and his government are doing their utmost to weaken and disorganize Russia so as to arrive at a situation when no other course but a separate peace would be possible. Do you consider that there is any ground for such insinuations and that the government, by refraining from any effective actions, are purposely allowing the Bolshevik elements to grow stronger? If it should be a question of bribery, we might be able to complete successfully if it were known how and through what agents it could be done, although it is not a pleasant thought. This comment refers to the information that Kerensky was in German pay. In other words, he was German operative. Document number 3 consists of 4 parts. Cable from Ambassador Francis of April 27, 1917, in Petrograd to Washington, D.C., requesting transmission of a message from prominent Russian Jewish bankers to prominent Jewish bankers in New York and requesting a subscription to the Kerensky Liberty Loan. B. Reply from Louis Marshall, May 10, 1917, representing American Jews. He declined the invocation while expressing support for the American Liberty Loan. C. Letter from Jacob Shipp of Cum Lo, dated November 25, 1918, to State Department. Mr. Pope relays a message from Russian Jewish banker Kamenka, that's K-A-M-E-N-K-A, calling for Allied help against the Bolsheviks, because Bolshevik government does not represent Russian people. It's in parentheses. D. Cable from Kamenka, related by Jacob Shipp. Documents. A. Secretary of State, Washington. This is 1229. Press, please deliver following to Jacob Shipp: Judge Brandeis, Professor Gotthell, Oscar Strauss, Rabbi Wise, Louis Marshall, and Morgenthau. Morgenthau is going to be pivotal in the Second World War after the collapse, defeat of Germany. We Russian Jews always believed that liberation of Russia meant also our liberation. Being deeply devoted to country, we place implicit trust in temporary government. We know the unlimited economic power of Russia and our immense natural resources, and the emancipation we attain will enable us to participate in the development of the country. We firmly believe that victorious finish of the war, owing help our allies and the United States, is near. Temporary government issuing now new public loan of freedom, and we feel our national duty support loan high, vital for war and freedom. We are sure that Russia has an unshakable power of public credit and will easily bear, that is, the necessary financial burdens. We formed special committee of Russian Jews for supporting loan, consisting of represented financial, industrial trading circles, and leading public men. We inform you here and request our brethren beyond the seas to support freedom of Russia, which became now case humanity and world civilization. Sorry about this. We suggest you form their special committee and let us know of steps you may take. Jewish Committee support success loan of freedom. This is Boris Kamenka, Chairman Baron Alexander Gunsberg, and Henry Salosberg. Francis. Dear Mr. Secretary, after reporting to our associates the results of the interview which you kindly grant to Mr. Morgenthau, Mr. Strauss and myself, in regard to the advisability of calling for a subscription to the Russian Freedom Loan, as requested in the cablegram of Baron Gunsberg and Monsieur Kamenka and Salzburg of Petrograd, which you recently communicated to us, we have concluded to act strictly upon your advice. Several days ago, we promised our friends at Petrograd an early reply to their call for aid. We would therefore greatly appreciate the forwarding of the following cablegrams provided in terms have you approval. Again, this is from Boris Kamiko at Don's Azov Bank in Petrograd. Our State Department, which we have consulted regards in present attempt towards securing public subscription here for any foreign loans inadvisable. The concentration of all efforts for the success of American war loans being essential, thereby enabling our government to supply funds to the Allies at lower interest rates than otherwise promised. Our energies to help the Russian cause more effectively must therefore necessarily be directed to encouraging subscription to the American Liberty Loans, Schiff, Marshall, Strauss, Morgenthau, Wise, and Gonheil. That is Gonheil. You are, of course, at liberty to make any changes to the phraseology of the suggested cablegram which you may deem desirable and which will indicate that our failure to respond directly to the request that has come to us is due to our anxiety to make our activities more, or I should say, most efficient. May I ask you to send me a copy of the cablegram as forward with a memorandum of the cost so that the department may be promptly reimbursed. I am with great respect, faithfully yours, Louis Marshall, Secretary of State of Washington, D.C. C. Dear Mr. Polk, P-O-L-K, will you permit me to send you copies of the cablegram receiving this morning and what I think, for regularity's sake, should be brought to the notice of the Secretary of State or your good self for such consideration as might be thought well to give this. Mr. Kamiko, the sender of the cablegram, is one of the leading men in Russia, I am informed, being financial advisor both of the Prince Lvov, L-V-O-F-L, government and of the Krinsky government. He is president of the Banco de Comercio de Azorodon of Petrograd, one of the most important financial institutions of Russia, but had likely to leave Russia with the event of Lenin and his comrades. Let me take this opportunity to send sincere greetings to you and Mrs. Pope and express the hope that you are now in perfect shape again and that Mrs. Pope and the children are in good health. Faithfully yours, Jacob H. Schiff. Honorable Frank L. Pope, Counselor of the State Department, Washington, D.C. Translation D. The complete triumph of liberty and right furnishes me a new opportunity to repeat to you my profound, I should say, admiration for the noble American nation. Hope to see now quick progress on the part of the Allies to help Russia in reestablishing order. Call your attention also to pressing necessities of replacing in Ukraine enemy troops at the very moment of their retirement in order to avoid Bolshevik evacuation. Friendly interventions of allies would be greeted everywhere with enthusiasm and looked upon as democratic action because the Bolshevik government does not represent Russian people. Wrote you September 19, cordial greetings, that is Kamiko. Comment. This is an important series because it refused the story of the Jewish bank conspiracy behind the Bolshevik Revolution. Clearly, Jacob Schiff of cum laude was not interested in supporting the Kerensky Liberty Loan, and Schiff went to the trouble of drawing State Department attention to Kamiko pleas for Allied interventions against the Bolsheviks. Obviously, Schiff and fellow banker Kamiko, unlike J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller, were as unhappy about the Bolsheviks as they had been about the Czars. Document number 4, description, memorandum from William Boyce Thompson, Director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Remember, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is the main bank. It's where all the power is of all the 12 banks in the country that are Federal Reserve. It is primary number 1. To Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Great Britain of 1917, December 1917. Document, first, the Russian situation is lost, and Russia lies entirely open to unopposed German exploitation unless a radical reversal of policy is once undertaken by the Allies. Second, because of their short-sighted diplomacy, the Allies, since the revolution, have accomplished nothing beneficial and done considerably harm to their own interests. 3, the Allies' representatives in Petrograd have been lacking in sympathetic understanding of the desire of the Russian people to attain democracy. our representatives were first connected officially with the Tsar regime, naturally have been influenced by that environment. 4. Meanwhile, on the other hand, the Germans have conducted propaganda that has undoubtedly aided them materially in destroying the government, in wrecking the army, and destroying trade and industry. If this continues unopposed, it may result in complete exploitation of the great country by Germany against the Allies. 5th, I based my opinion upon a careful and initiative study of the situation both outside and inside official circles during my stay in Petrograd between August 7 and November 29, 1917. 6. What can be done to improve the situation of the Allies in Russia? The diplomatic personnel, both British and American, should be changed to one democratic in spirit and capable of sustaining democratic sympathy. There should be erected a powerful unofficial committee with headquarters in Petrograd to operate in the background, so to speak, the influence of which is matters of policy should be recognized and accepted by the diplomatic, consular, and military officials of the Allied. Such committee should be so composed in personnel as to make it possible to entrust to it wide discretional powers. It would presumably undertake work in various channels, the nature which will become obvious as the task progresses, etc. I would aim to meet all new conditions as they might arise. 7. It is impossible now to define at all completely the scope of this new Allied committee. I can perhaps assist to a better understanding of its possibly usefulness and service by making a brief reference to the work which I started, which is now in the hands of Raymond Robbins, who is well and favorably known to Colonel Bushin. A work which is in the future will undoubtedly have to be somewhat altered and added to the order to meet new conditions. My work has been performed chiefly through a Russian committee on civil education aided by Madame Brest-Kovsky, the grandmother of the revolution. She was assisted by Dr. David Soskice, Soskice, the private secretary of the then Prime Minister Kerensky, now of London. Nicholas Basil Tchaikovsky, at one time chairman of the Peasants' Cooperation Society, and by other substantial social revolutionaries constituting the saving element of democracy as between the extreme right of the official and property owner class and the extreme left embodying the most radical elements of the Socialistic Party. The aim of the committee, as stated in the cable message from Madame Brest-Kovsky to President Wilson, can be gathered from this question. A widespread education is necessary to make Russia an orderly democracy. We plan to bring this education to the soldier in the camp, to the workman in the factory, to the peasant in the village. Those aiding in this work realize that for centuries the masses have been under the heel of autocracy, that is monarchies, which have given them not protection but oppression, that a democratic form of government in Russia could be maintained only by the defeat of the German army, by the overthrow of the German autocracy. Could free Russia unprepared for great government responsibilities, uneducated, untrained, to expect long to survive with Imperial Germany, her next door neighbor? Certainly not. Democratic Russia would become speedily the greatest war prize the world has ever known. The committee designed to have an educational center in each regiment of the Russian army in the form of soldiers' clubs. These clubs were organized as rapidly as possible, and lectures were employed to address the soldiers. The lectures were in really teachers, and it should be remembered that there is a percentage of 90 among the soldiers of Russia who can neither read nor write. Okay, I don't understand percent. I guess 90% is what it meant to be. At the time of the Bolshevik outbreak, many of these speakers were in the field making a fine impression and attaining excellent results. There were 250 in the city of Moscow alone. It was contemplated by the committee to have at least 5,000 of these lecturers. We had under publications many newspapers of the ABC class, printing matter on the simplest style, and were assisted about 100 more. These papers carried the appeal for patriotism, unity, and coordination into the in the homes of the workmen and the peasants. After the overthrow of the last Kerensky government, we materially aided the dissemination of the Bolshevik literature, distributing it through agents and by aeroplanes to the German army. If the suggestion is permissible, it might be well to consider whether it would not be desirable to have the same Bolshevik literature sent into Germany and Austria across the West and Italian fronts. Remember, this is still a war going on also, folks. So naturally, Germany and Austria are involved here, which is already this is the collapse. Actually, this with this war is just the collapse of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. 8. The presence of a small number of Allied troops in Petrograd would certainly have done much to prevent the overthrow of the Kerensky government in November. I should like to suggest for your consideration, if present conditions continue. The concentration of all British and French government employees in Petrograd, and if the necessity should arise, it might be formed into a fairly effective force. It might be advisable even to pay a small sum to a Russian force. There's also a large body of volunteers recruited in Russia, many of them included in the intelligentsia of the center class, and these have done splendid work in the trenches. They might properly be aided. 9. If you ask for a further program, I should say that it is impossible to give it now. I believe that intelligence and courageous work will still prevent Germany from occupying the field to itself and thus exploiting Russia at the expense of the Allies. There will be many ways in which this service can be rendered, which will become obvious as the work progresses. Comment. Following the memorandum, the British War Cabinet changed its policy to one of being pro-Bolshevicism. Note that Thompson admits to distributing Bolshevik literature by his agents. The confusion over the date on which Thompson left Russia is he states November 29th. In his document is cleared up by the prime papers at the Hoover Institute. There were several changes of travel plans, and Thompson was still in Russia in early December. The memorandum was probably written in Petrograd in late November. Document number 5, description, later dated May 9, 1918, from Felix Frankfurter, then a special assistant to the Secretary of War, to Santerio, Notario, allies for Alexander Neuberg, a Bolshevik agent in the United States, listed as document number 1544 in the Lust Committee files in New York. Document, War Department, Washington, May 9, 1918. My dear Mr. Novatel, thank you very much for your letter on the 4th. I knew you would understand the purely friendly and wholly unofficial character of our talk, and I appreciate the prompt steps you have taken to correct your Sorolo letter. Be wholly assured that nothing has transpired which diminishes my interest in the questions which you present. Quite the contrary, I am much interested in the considerations you are advancing and for the point of view you are urging. The issues at stake are the interests that means much for the whole world to meet them. Adequately, we need all the knowledge and wisdom we can possibly get. Cordially yours, Felix Frankfurter. Santerio Neritabo, that is Esquire he has here. Yelo Soloyo was a Bolshevik and commissar in Finland. And then the text says again here, says, continue grateful to you for original interest, original such. So this is all, again, another telegram being shared. This is all, he's used almost all telegrams here, information. Because those are the only sources apparently they have of what's going on. Comment, this letter by Frankfurter was written to Nortelio and Nauberg, a Bolshevik agent in the United States at a time when Frankfurter held an official position as special assistant to Secretary of War Baker in the War Department. Apparently, Nauberg was willing to change a letter to Commissar Sarolo according to Frankfurter's instruction. You know that Felix Frankfurter would eventually become the Supreme Court Justice in the future. The Lust Committee acquired the original Frankfurter draft, including Frankfurter's change and not the letter received by Neuberg. And now we have the Soviet Bureau in 1920. And let's see, see if we want to get into this or not, because I'm trying to figure out this. So what we've got here is simply, it's got at the very top of the position, to the extreme left, name, citizenship, born, and former employee. So I'm just trying to figure out if I want to go into this or not, if it's worth it. Because most people would not know who these people, in fact, myself would not. Let's just go ahead and do it. Okay, let's just do it. Let's get it. Let's just teach whatever's here, whatever's shared. So here we at. Okay, so the position representative of USSR is Ludwig Martins. His citizenship is German, born in Russia. He is former employee of the BP of Weinberg and Posner Engineering at 120 Broadway. Next one is officer, that is Office Manager Secretary Gregory Weinstein, Russian. He was born in Russia and he's a journalist. The next one would be Santiago Neravirdio is Finnish. His country he was born in was Russia, and he's a journalist. Assistant Secretary is Kenneth Duran, who is in the United States, citizenship, and was born in the United States. And he's on the U.S. Committee on Public Information, formerly aide to Colonel House. That is, wow, interesting concern there. So he's actually worked for Colonel House. Next, Private Secretary to Nortepo was Dorothy King, K-E-E-N, U.S. citizenship, and born in the United States. High school. Tefla is the translator, that I should say, is Mary Modell. She's Russian and is originally from Russia, school in Russia. File clerk, Alexander Coleman, born here in the U.S. and is a citizen of U.S. high school. Telephone clerk, Blanchard Abusier, Russian, and Russia was the home country, high school. Office attendant military expert was Nestor Kunovich, Lieutenant Colonel Boris Tekakov. These are both Russians, two of them, and they're born in Russia, and they're a military critic on Daily Express. Continue on down here. We're not going to go to that. I'm not going to go through all this. It's just too much here. It's just not important. Document the National City Bank of New York, April 15, 1919. Honorable Joel Rathbone, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasurer, Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. Rathbone, R-A-T-H-B-O-N-E, I beg to hand you herewith photographs of two documents which we have received this morning by Russian mail from a Mr. L. Martins, who claims to be the representative in the United States of the Russian Socialist Federal Soviet Republic and witnessed by a Dr. Julius Hammer, the acting director of the financial department. You will see from these documents that there is a demand being made upon us for any and all funds on deposit with us in the name of Mr. Boris Bakhmakov, alleged Russian ambassador in the United States, only in the name of any individual, committee, or mission purporting to act on behalf of the Russian government in subordination to Mr. Bakhmakov or directly. We should be very glad to receive from you whatever advice or instructions you may care to give us in this matter. Yours respectfully, J.H. Carter, Vice President. Comment. The significance of this letter is related to the longtime associate, that is, of 1917 to 1974, of the Hammer family, that is the Armand Hammer family, with the Soviets. I think some people know that. Document number 8, description. Letter dated August 3rd, 1920, from Soviet courier Bill Bobrokov to Kenneth Duran, former aide to Colonel House, taken from Bobrokov by the U.S. Department of Justice. Document, Department of Justice Bureau of Investigation, was at 15 Park Row in New York City, New York, August 10, 1920. Dear Sir, confirming telephone conversation with Mr. Ruch, R-U-C-H, today I am transmitting herewith original documents taken from the effect of B.L. Bobrok, steamship Frederick VIII. The letter advises Mr. Kenneth Duran, signed by a bill dated August 3rd, 1920, together with the translation from Pravda, July 1st, 1920, signed by Trotsky, and copies of cablegrams were found inside the blue envelope addressing Mr. Kenneth Duran of 228 South 19th Street in Philadelphia, PA. This blue envelope was in turn sealed inside the white envelope attached. Most of the effects of Mr. Brokoff consist of machinery catalogs, specific specifications, correspondence regarding the shipment of various equipment, etc., to Russian ports. Mr. Brokoff was closely questioned by Agent Davis and the custom authorities, and detailed reports of same will be sent to Washington. Very truly yours, G.F. Lamb, Division Superintendent. Letter to Kenneth Duran. Dear Kenneth, thanks for your most welcome letter. I felt very much cut off and hemmed in, a feeling which has been sharply emphasized by recent experience. I have felt distress in inability to force a different attitude towards the Bureau and to somehow get funds to you. The cable $5,000 to you, as was done last week, is but a sorry joke. I hope the proposal to sell gold in America, about which we have been cabling recently, will soon be found practicable. Yesterday, we cabled asking if you could sell 5 million rubles at a minimum of 45 cents. Present market rate shows at 51.44 cents. That would net at least net $2,225,000. Sorry, $2,225,000. Presents needs as $2 million to pay Neil Jewell and Company in Christiania for the first part of the coal shipment from America to Bordeaux. I've got a Bordeaux and Miramas in Argentina. I don't understand why is American coal being shipped over to Russia. I don't get that. I'm sure that the Russians have coal. Why would they buy coal from Americans? It makes no sense to me. That's just my question. The first ship is nearing Bordeaux, and the second left New York about July 28. Altogether, Niles Jewell and Company, or rather the Norge Bank of Christina, on their and our account hold $11 million in gold rubles of ours, which they themselves brought from Reval to Christiania as security for our coal order and the necessity tonnage. But the offers for purchase of this gold that they have so far been able to get are very poor, the best being $575 per kilo, whereas the rate offered by the American Mint or Treasury Department is now $644.42. And considering the large sum involved, it would be a shame to let it go at too heavy a loss. I hope that you get this, you will have been able to effect the sale. At the same time, thus getting $250,000 or more for the Bureau. If we can't, in some ways, pay the $2 million in Christiania, that was due 4 days ago. Within a very short time, Niels Jewels and Company will have the right to sell our gold that they now hold on the best price attainable, which, as stated above, is quite low. We don't know yet how the Canadian negotiators are going on. We understand Nortavia turned over the strings to Sean, Shoen, when N's arrest seemed imminent. We don't, at this point, at this writing, know where Nortavia is. Our guess is that after his enforced return to England from Eskilstuna, Denmark, Sir Basil Thompson had him shipped abroad a steamer for Reval, but we have not yet heard from Reval that he has arrived there, and we certainly would hear from Gogoski or from himself. Humphrey saw Reval at Eskilstuna and is himself in difficulties with the Danish police because of it. All of his connections are being probed for. His passport has been taken away. He has been up twice for examination. He looks as if he will be lucky if he escapes deportation. It was 2 weeks ago that Nortavia arrived at Eskilstuna, 300 miles from here, but having no Danish visa, I assume, the Danish authorities refused to permit him to land. He was transferred to a steamer due to sail at 8 o'clock the following morning. By depositing 200 kroner, he was allowed shore leave for a couple of hours. Wanting to get to Copenhagen on long-distance wire and having practically no more money, he once more pawned that gold watch of his for 25 krona. Therewith getting in touch with Humphreys, who within half an hour jumped aboard the night train, slept on the floor, and arrived at Edinburgh at 7:30. Humphreys found Nortavia, got permission from the captain to go aboard. At 20 minutes went over Nortavia, then had to go ashore and the boat sailed. Humphreys was then invited to the police officer by two plainclothesmen who had been observing the proceedings. He was closely questioned, address taken, then released, and then might take train back to Copenhagen. He sent telegrams to Europe of Daily Herald, Sean, and to Kiskenhole at 128 New Bond Street, urging them to be sure and meet Nortavia boat so that Nortavia couldn't again be speared away. But we don't know yet just what happened. The British government vigorously denied that they had any intentions of sending him to Finland. Moscow has threatened reprisals if anything happens to him. Meantime, the investigation of H has begun. He was called upon at his hotel by the police, requested to go to the headquarters, but not arrested. And we understand that his case is now before the Minister of Justice. Whatever may be the final outcome, Humphrey's comments upon the reasonable courtesy shown him, contrasting it with the bureaucracy of the Red Raids in America. He found that detective headquarters, they knew of some of these outgoing letters and telegrams. I was interested in your favorable comment upon the Krassin interview, Krassin interview of Tobrinkin. You do not mention the Lebatov one, because I had to fight like a demon with L to get the opportunity for Tobrinkin. Though T arrived with a letter from Novotevo, as also did author Rule, L brutally turned down the less than 1 minute the application T was making to go into Russia. Would hardly take time to hear him, saying it was impossible to allow two correspondents for the same paper to enter Russia. He gave advice, I guess it's a visa. He gave a visa to Rule largely because of the promise made last summer to Rule by L. Rule, then went off to Revel, there to await the permission that L had cabled asking Moscow to give. Topinkin, a nervous, almost a broken man because of his turn down, stayed here. I realized the mistake that had been made by the snap judgment, and I started in on the job of getting it changed, cutting a long story short. I got him to Revel with a letter to Grogotsky from L. In the meantime, Moscow refused Rule, notwithstanding L's visa. L was maddened, an affront to his visa, and insisted that it be honored. It was, and Rule prepared to leave. Suddenly, word came from Moscow to Rule's revoking the permission, and Libyat saying that information had reached Moscow that Rule was in service of State Department. At time of writing, both Tobinsky and Rule are in Revel stuck. I told L this morning of the boat leaving tomorrow and of the courier be available. Asked him if he had anything to write to Martins, offered to take it in shorthand for him. But no, he said he had nothing to write about that, and I might perhaps send duplicates of our recent cables to Martin. Kamakov passed by here on a British destroyer en route to London and didn't stop off here at all. And Krastin went direct from Stockholm. The negotiation ally in Polish, and in the general situation you know about as much as we do here. L's negotiations with the Italians has finally resulted in establishing a mutual representation. Our representative Borowski has already gone to Italy, and their representative, Mr. Gravavine, is en route to Russia. We have just sent 2 shiploads of Russian wheat to Italy from Odessa. Give my regards to the people of your circle that I know, with all good wishes to you. Sincerely yours, Bill. The batch of letters you sent that is 5 Cromwell Road, Charlingham, Harley, Manchester, has not yet arrived. Okay, I'm going to probably, that's pretty much it here. There are more little things here, but I don't see them as being that important. So I appreciate you being here and listening. This information is available. Again, like I said, this is Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. I will say some comments. So I want to say something that I really, this is really basically bugs me. And I don't know if that's because of Anthony C. Sutton chose these particular people, or was it the true meaning of all the government officials? It seems as though they seem to be almost in favor of the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, I don't know if they understood what was going to take place in the future, or the past, I should say, not the future. I mean, it's not the past. What I mean is simply is, why was there open arms for the Bolshevik Revolution? Why is that? They knew, maybe these guys are completely imbeciles, I guess that could be a possibility, that this was truly a financial dealings between America and Russia. And it was a way of actually the American bankers and businessmen to take and profit off of this. That's why they put so much money out in front, okay, and to be advantage to them in the long run, you see. And they're going to get what they want. The other thing that really stands out to me was simply is that they know, these bankers know who these people are that they allowed loose, because Lenin and Trotsky had been in trouble before by other governments in the West, that is in Europe. In fact, Lenin was in Switzerland and he'd been in trouble himself. He'd been there into Russia and he was thrown out. What's surprising to me is that the Russian government, the Tsar, was actually unbelievably um, nice to these people. Almost out of the, I mean, just doesn't make sense. They'd already tried to revolt in 1905, and also tried another revolt in early 1917. This was their third chance, and yet, they are not the government. I don't think the Tsar. I don't know what the Tsar was thinking. I don't know, his government, whatever is going on here. Uh, yes, Melissa, how you doing? I've been watching the documentaries on this for years, and I still have so many questions. Yeah, I have questions too. I don't know if you're talking about Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. Um, I have other books I've read. That is, Melissa. It seems as though the Russians are, the Tsar and his government are completely oblivious of what's going on, and the bankers are not. They're not interested anything to do with the government. They're not. Well, they know who they're. They've gotten two of the roughest people. That is Lenin and also Trotsky. And eventually, when once he dies, the assumption is Trotsky's going to take over the power. But he's fighting out here with the Civil War. I don't know if you know that, Melissa, which is another okay, basically something been put together, and they're all different types of factions fighting one another, not fighting one another. They're not working together as a unit. And I think that's been designed that way, or these people were not willing to work together. Now, we know that the whites were involved. That's the former Tsar people who want to get back to Tsar. The Reds, National Communists. We have a couple other groups, and I'm trying to remember some of my history in my long ago. The Greens are what we call wanting to have a legitimate government. They want to be free. They want to be free from not only from the Tsar, but not also the communists. And there are a couple of other groups that are involved too. If you've read a good book, one of the good books I would suggest to look into this would be the book by Death by Governments by R.J. Rommel. I guess it's Rummel, I think it is, or maybe it's just one M. He talks about all the people who are killed. And he does a book that's basically death by governments. That is, governments are killing their own people. But it seems as though they're incompetent in one hand here, but it seems as though the American government itself is completely capitulatory to this whole idea. They bought into the whole idea of supporting the bankers and the industrialists. And I assume now, and I'm seeing this, maybe these people in high office are actually tools of the bankers and the industrials. That's my theory. That's the only thing I can figure out here. I read some things about Anders Solzhenitsyn. He did come out with a book, but unfortunately, as far as I have not been able to get, the last volume of the work he did was here in the United States, in Vermont. I'm trying to think of the name of the title. It's something to do with living together. It was to do with the Jews. It was to do with the Jews and Russians. What transpired with the Jews was simply they were given land in a certain part. This was the part of the czars were trying to make peace with this group, the Jews. And they gave them land. Seriously, they gave them land. And what happened was, a few years later, they didn't own any land, but the Russians were slaves to the Jews. That took place in Palatine, Paletin, which was an area, this was them. And they were now in charge of businesses themselves. So they were not working the land. And as far as I can tell, they didn't want to work the land, but they used it in order to eventually benefit themselves. What I mean by that is that the land, they didn't want to do the work. That's basically what it is. They didn't want to do the work. So next thing you know, the Russians themselves, the peasants, are now slaves to the Jews, is what I understand. Now, that's not the acceptable view, but we also know that most of the terrorism that was taking place in Russia before the communist takeover were people who, what we call terrorists, who killed certain major people in the Russian government. And they were determined to overthrow the government also. So I don't know if part of this also becomes a part of what I would call Woodrow Wilson's a radical. He doesn't come across that way, but he is a radical. What I mean by that, he's a progressive, and what progressive means he's favoring more of a socialist viewpoint. And so what's taking place, he's got people working for him. But Colonel Mandel House is the key figure of all this, and I need to read that book, Mr. Drew, the administrator, because Mr. House is a communist. He comes from that background, and I think I've read that in the chapters here in this book, that basically his dad profited much, and he was living in Texas. And then what happened was simply Colonel Mandel House had a protector, Mr. Phillips Drew, that's what it should be, Philip Drew, D-R-U. And that's a biography of himself. He saw himself as a very important person. And not only he had immense power over Woodrow Wilson, he dominated Woodrow Wilson. He was actually, it seems to be Woodrow Wilson's confidant, but not only that, he was, he trusted everything Mr. House said to him. And I don't know if that appealed to the ego of Wilson, but he sure made up. If you look at what had happened in his administrations, in the two administrations he was involved in, radical change came to this country because of him. He first allowed the Federal Reserve Bank, a group of private bankers, to come in power, and they took over the printing of the money. And then what happened simply was that he, in his administration, he done away with what we call the import tax in order to protect American businesses, that is, at that time, which was the way the government supported itself financially. And so what happened was he got away with that. And then what he did, he allowed then the taxpayers of America to become the backbone of supporting the government, which is completely unconstitutional, period. And with that, he did that. There was taxes on wages, which was unheard of. The only time there was a tax also on wages or income tax was actually done in the under the Lincoln administration during the war. Then it stopped. The other thing that's critical for people to understand is that this is really, you would think he's progressive, but his office staff, that is the White House staff, that is people in his house, that is servants, whatever you want to call them, they were separated by color. The black people were put in a certain position and place, and white people were put in another place. And he's supposed to be progressive, but yet he's involved with that. The other thing that took place was the states' rights issue too. States that before Wilson was involved they chose their senators by the legislature of the state of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, whatever. It was not voted on by the people. The people voted for the representatives, but the senators were always chosen by the Senate in the House, in the Senate of this particular state they brought upon. So what I'm trying to explain to you simply, there are major things that took place with Woodrow Wilson, immensely, and they're not progressive for people. They're progressive for what I would call a socialist type of network of government. And so he's the when people complain about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, well, of course they do. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt was just putting the ice cream on top of the cake after what Woodrow Wilson had done. You see, and then Woodrow Wilson was in CERN for 2 years, I mean two terms. Although he was very much sick in the last part of his years, he had come to the realization that he actually was a traitor. He had actually yes, yes, you knew that this was the case with the senators. Yes, but that gave what we call a defeat towards the state government, the state power. In other words, you had this power based upon federal and states. And what happened was simply is this was destroyed with the state department, states that is, and that also allowed popular vote, which is what we call democracy, which was anti-republic. And that was part of the republic form of government, was allowing the particular senators in the House to choose whatever senators they wanted, that is, to both houses, choose which ones they want to represent in the state, in the federal U.S. Senate positions. So, and then most people don't know the simply is that he destroyed the trade issue because of import taxes. So what I'm saying simply is the taxation burden now is placed on the citizens instead of actually on import taxes. That's radical. That's very radical. And that benefited these corporations, just like NAFTA did, has had effect in started with the Clinton administration, with NAFTA allowing the same thing. And this actually benefited the major large corporations, so they didn't have to pay import tax if their facilities are in Mexico. You see, and so that means simply is they can import that product back in with cheap labor from Mexico, and guess what? They make a bigger profit. That's what most people don't see. And there are no jobs here in manufacturing such and such here in the country anymore. But what I'm trying to point out simply is that back to the original base of what I was talking to you about, or what I was talking about other people too, was that there seems to be no fear with the Bolsheviks. And like I was going to say when I was talking with the book, Government, Death by Governments, there's 65 to 85 million people that were killed in Russia in the times that they were in power. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn was one of those who actually was in the gulags. And many of the people where he was at tried to escape. Some were successful, most were not. So they didn't want to be in this is an area of the world that is almost communicationless. That is, this in Siberia, and it's called weather there. And it's cold just like it would be like in Alaska, so to speak. So these people took that risk. They took a big risk. Many of them, maybe successfully, the ones that did get away from basically the harms of no food, no water, and probably because of the cold temperatures. But many just simply escaped just to get away of what was going on around them. So I don't know if that explains anything to you, Melissa, but good to see you here. Glad you have some comments here. One of the other things I would suggest to you is there's a documentary called I do have it on my, shared a long time ago on Facebook, probably a couple months ago. It's a guy named Jurlina, I think it is. Let me run to Amazon real quick and just tell you this and give you the correct name so it won't be all butchered. Um, just bear with me. Yes, there's a commentary and a book, Under the Sign of the Scorpion, The Rise and Fall of the Soviet Empire. And this was done by, I think it's a Finnish guy or a Swedish guy. I don't remember. He's got an unusual name. He has umlauts above his name. So it's Juri, Juri, be his first name, his last name, Lina. There's a documentary that he does. It's in film. It's a very good piece, very good. And that would be one of the ones I recommend. Um, and then there's another one he did also, called Architects of Deception. And I don't know if you can get the book or not, but you can look it up either YouTube or somewhere. There should be the Articles of Deception, which he talks about the Masons mainly, the Freemasons. So I hope that that would help you out. Because anyway, because he does that in a a documentary, I should say, and I think it's important that actually people watch that. I have a book here also, dealing with a lot of this stuff, and this is the book I have here, is Behind Communism. And this book goes into a lot of detail more than others, and how there was, after this government gets in power, especially under Stalin, it's ruthless. I mean, it's ruthless. And we know about the Holodrome. Holodrome was it's when the Russians were starving, and this was under, I think, under Stalin also in the early years. He had his soldiers to confiscate everything that the Ukrainians had that was food. So if they had chickens, pigs, or sheep, or whatever, cows, they stole them. They took them away, and left them there, or either butcher them. They were ruthless. Uh, and these people were, it's documented in here. We'll do this sometime in this book because it's interesting information, more than most people would really want to know, because it's really bad. And then that's one book I have. Another book I have is also dealing with that. If I can find it here, really, I might not see it here. It's also dealing with the concentration camps, or in Russia also. So, trying to see if I found it here, but I don't see it here readily here. Here it is. Here it is. This is it here. This is it here. I don't know if you can even get this anymore. I bought this back in the 1980s or 1990s. This is another detailed reports. There are pictures in here. But I would suggest you watch the documentation first, by what I'm talking about, this Jury Linde. I would recommend that wholeheartedly. Most people don't have any idea what has ever happened. They just don't know. And it's sad. And it's people need to know this. They just need to know this. Also, I'd recommend, if you're interested a little bit more, and I'll do with what I would call the Tavistock Institute. This is a book by John Coleman. I have been trying to get the book, but I have found a copy of it that is on PDF drive that you can read online. And it's simply called the Tavistock Institute, Human Relations. It's probably one of the best books I've read. It makes connections with not only Tavistock, but Tavistock was based upon Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School is involved in Germany at one time, and then they left when Hitler came to power, and they set up shop in England. And I have videos. You can go to my channel and search that, and I read from that particular book. And I think it's probably the best work out there. What is happening because Tavistock is based upon what I would call programming. It's a way of programming. Um, it's involved now enormously, using all kinds of schemes to keep people entrapped themselves, not knowing what the truth is, and it's psychologically and it's sociologically. So that's one thing you might want to look into, Melissa. I appreciate your comments and I appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. But we're in really dire straits right now. Most people are unaware of that. Our country is a mess, but it's not just our country; it's the whole world, so to speak, the whole West, especially the West, because the people in the West, it's the dying of the West. It's the decline of the West, you want to call it. Um, there's nowhere to run to. You see, that's the fact. There's no place to run to. Um, and with the Georgia Guidestones now being destroyed, most people are unaware of that also. That was a warning of what they're going to do. They're not going to stop unless people say no. And most people are not saying no because they don't know. That is KNOW. So it's just, and then I have a particular book, a pamphlet here I just got early this week. Most people are unaware of this, but there are people who basically don't believe there is such a thing as the Holocaust. And so this particular trial was taking place in Canada way back in the 1980s. I haven't read it yet, just got it. Interesting information I wanted to find out. It's not that long, but it's about a particular guy who denies what took place in Germany many years ago, what he would call the deaths, or what people call it is the Holocaust. So I'm just trying to find the truth. That's all I'm interested in. I want to know the truth. I'm tired of being lied to about everything. Everything around me is lies. So, but I have already done. I just want to make sure the audience knows I have already done this particular book here by Dr. John Coleman. I have also done uh, if you can get Eustace Mullins' works, any of them, it's well worth it. Eustace Mullins is probably, I would say, two people I recommend wholeheartedly would be Dr. John Coleman and then also Dr. Eustace Mullins. I was going to try to tell you the other copies here. I've done Diplomacy by Deception. I've done this. This is the Committee of 300. Unfortunately, it's dated, but it's still a good piece of work because, frankly, there are certain people. These are the major PowerPoint people now, so to speak. I have not done Trilaterals Over America. That's a work that's done by that's not Eustace Mullins, it's someone else. And I plan to, in the near future here, begin to work with this particular guy here. This is a Eustace Mullins work. Eustace Mullins is, again, like I said, with Dr. John Coleman, are probably the two major people, writers. This is about Ezra Pound, who had an enormous impact upon Eustace Mullins, changed his life completely, and Eustace Mullins um, followed him. I'm not following him, but actually, he was thrown in a mental institution. That is, there's nothing wrong with him. He just opposed the American government being involved in the Second World War, and basically they didn't like that. And eventually, he got out in the late 50s or early 60s, went back to Italy, and he passed away. And this guy is a poet. This was a poet. Um, you can get this book usually from Amazon or elsewhere on eBay. And I've also done the book, also Eustace Mullins, which is his best book, one of the best book I've seen so far, writing about the New World, not New World, but the Federal Reserve System. And I recommend that. This is another particular book that I've been going through is The Rape of Justice. This is again by Eustace Mullins. Eustace Mullins wrote a ton of information. Now, where did he get his information from, folks? I'll tell you where. You may have heard it, may not. It's simply the Library of Congress. He was able to get into there and look at all the books, whatever it was, the confidential stuff, whatever you want to call it, maybe one book or whatever, and put it together. And he's probably written at least probably 10 to 12 books. And I have like 3 or 4 of his. I have Ezra Pound. I've got this one here. I've got the other one about the World Bank, such and such. That is the Federal Reserve System, I should say. And so this is critical for people to understand what's going on and putting the picture together. And most people are completely unaware. I'll also share one other thing here. I've done a partial deal with. So another guy I would suggest you can look into is Michael Hoffman. This is a book that is called The Secret Societies and the Psychological Warfare. And this was what I call a book he wrote back, I think, early 2000, right after the Trade Center collapse. Yes. Look him up. Now, he is a Catholic, and he's just come out with another. He's got a few books. What is I'm trying to say? He's got there was the white trade set, the white slaves here in America. Most people are not aware of that. He's written a book on that. He's talked about the Roman Catholic Church, where they started using usury, that is interest on loans. So I recommend him. And there's I would recommend also, if you want to look at a magazine, taking periodically, like 4 copies a year, 6 copies a year, I think it is, his Barnes Review, that is Barnes Review, Rebiew, out of Washington, D.C. That would be another group, another people to look into. They have tons of books. The only problem is they're kind of expensive because they're not. But the other thing I want to say, other thing here, I'm about to forget. This is a critical written book that most people are unaware of. And this is, I think, this is from another group of writers. It's called Lincoln's Marxes. Most people are unaware. This is written by a gentleman named Al Benson Jr. and Walter Donald Kennedy. These are what I call Southern writers. They're not, they're not what I call political science writers or internationals or anything like that. But what they do is they put together what takes place after basically 1848 in Western Europe. They failed socialists that tried to overthrow the legitimate governments in Europe. They failed. All of them failed. And some were thrown in prison. Some escaped. Some of them escaped to Switzerland. And then what happened was they left Switzerland and came here to America. Most are not aware of that. And this is where the communists are involved in America. They already are in his government. Most people are unaware of that. So anyway, I could talk all night, and I'm sure you guys, it's like if you're here on the East Coast, it's getting late, 10:20. But I appreciate you. Thank you, Melissa, for the positive comments. Thank you. And you're welcome to come back and share whatever you like to share. And thank you for, being a part of this whole thing. We all can learn from one another, and just share this with other people. And I'm on not only Facebook now, but I'm also on YouTube, and I'm also on Odyssey. So there are videos there typed up. I've done quite a few of them. Usually I do at least a couple videos a day, so that adds up real quick. And let other people know what's going on. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for being here. You have a good night. Okay. Thank you, Melissa, for your comments. You have a good night too. You're welcome, Melissa. You take care.